Good evening. My name is Mick Napier. I'm from the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and we're hosting this webinar to deal with the same theme, to go into depth with the same theme dealt with by the film currently on release, Palestine 36, i.e. the Palestinian Revolution of 36-39, the enormity of it, the dynamism of it, the magnitude and breadth of it, and how it was ultimately defeated and who defeated it. So tonight we have two speakers. One is, and who'll be first, is Haim Bresheeth, who is many things, including a filmmaker, but he's the author of a book on the Israeli military, an army like no other, how the Israeli military made a nation, I think. And he's also a founder member of the Jewish Network for Palestine. And Haim will speak for 25 to 30 minutes on how we got to 1936, the situation in occupied Palestine, in Mandate Palestine, in colonial Palestine in the years before that. What led up to the explosion of 36-39. The second speaker is Hazem Jamjoum. He translated the seminal work by Ghassan Kanafani, A History of the Palestinian Revolution 1936-39. He's a published author, and much else besides. Haim, would you like to start and explain to people the situation in Palestine up until before 1936?
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm very happy to speak with Hazem, who comes from a very important family in Palestine that had many roles in the struggle over the years, and also did this great task of bringing to the English public a translation, a very good translation, of Ghassan Kanafani's work, which is a very important seminal work we should all know. There's no time to speak about Ghassan Kanafani, but he is really one of the giants of the Palestinian movement, an intellectual, a fighter, someone who really was crucial, and that is why he was murdered by the Israelis. Now, we've divided the task between us, Hazem and myself. I will explain the context and what actually made the Intifada possible and necessary and crucial, and Hazem will talk about the Intifada itself. So, first of all, we have to understand the historical conditions in Palestine at the time of the 1930s. To actually do that, I need to go about a century backwards. That's what happens with historians. Basically, go back to the empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the land system that was at the time working there. Now, in Palestine, there was an arrangement that was probably all over the country, and most villages were operating it, and it was called Musha. And what imagine Palestine as made of two regions. You would know this. There is the hilly West Bank, and there is the flat coastal region. Now, both of them are very different in terms of agricultural land. The hilly West Bank is based around terraces in the main. Terraces require a lot of work over generations of fellaheen, and also they require a watering system, and this took a long time and took a lot of labor to build, these are systems, terraces are agricultural systems that need careful keeping together. Now that meant that a lot of work was involved. In the flat coastal regions, there are large areas which are flat, which are fit for cereals, which are not growing in the hilly part because they're not really suited for that. But also fruit orchards like obviously citrus, pomegranate, almond, carobs were growing in the flat parts of the coastal regions. Both systems needed a lot of work and a lot of investment, human investment. Now, that meant that the historical system of land ownership was, the musha, was very sophisticated. It wasn't private property. Imagine a village like, you know, a round habitation where the houses are built, and around it there are small portions of land that families work on a subsistence basis. They grow vegetables, etc. These are small plots. And around that is the land of the whole village, which is held in common, a bit like the common ground in the English villages in the Middle Ages. So this is not a private property system. It's a system that the whole village holds in common, works in common, and shares the fruits of their labor. That's very important to understand before we start thinking what happened in Palestine later. Now, in 1858, the Ottomans realized that they need to modernize the empire in terms of land holdings. And because most of Palestine and parts of Syria and parts of Lebanon also are on the musha system, they cannot actually tax individual landowners because the whole village is actually using the land. So there isn't a single landowner. And they pass a system, a land reform system called Tanzimat, which means moving to land ownership as private property. This is not a system that the Fellaheen needed or wanted. It's a system that they got from the Ottoman Empire. And when that system was applied, the individual people in the villages did not want to be the landowners, of course, because they didn't want to pay the taxes. And they normally would have an effendi, you know, someone from a nearby town to take over the ownership for them on their behalf, so to speak. And they would lease their specific part from him and pay him a sum every year. And he will pay the taxes on the whole land. This system was okay because the people that took it over were probably, to begin with, family members that people knew and trusted. But as this became a private property, which it wasn't before, the landowner could sell it. Now, if a Palestinian landowner sold it to a Lebanese landowner, which happened quite a lot, then the Lebanese took over and did what the Palestinian landowner did. Basically, gradually, they became more cut off from the village because some of them were not anymore from families that lived in the village. They were doing it for getting money. And so the kind of unwritten contract between the Fellaheen and the landowner that took over were broken. But it didn't mean much because if the land was sold to another Arab landowner, not much has changed. The land continued to be worked by the Fellaheen. they would pay the landowner, and the landowner was making a living from it. So that was not really a difficult change. But think about it, when Zionism at the end of the 19th century starts looking for land. And when they did that, they of course went to the absentee landowners in Cairo, in Damascus, in Beirut, etc., in Aleppo, all over the countries around Palestine, where people owned land in Palestine. And that meant owning the village or a number of villages. And when the Zionists bought it, they did what Herzl told them to do. They moved the people off the land. That has never happened before in Palestine. Villages changed, lands changed hands, but the Fellahin stayed on the land. Now with Zionism, they said, we own it and you go. So they not only lost the land and lost their livelihood, but they lost their homes. This was what Zionism has introduced into the 20th century Palestine that never happened before in the Middle East. And that was a terrible change. And in 1926, for example, in the Valley of Jezreel, 26 villages, more than 10,000 people were expelled off their land because a very large family, I think it was a Sarsuk family, I'm not sure, but I think it was a family that got the land from the Sultan as a kind of payment in kind. And they sold the 26 villages to the Zionist Federation, and more than 10,000 people were kicked off the land. And you needed the militias and the police to remove them because they weren't going to move. So after 1926, it became very clear the Zionists are going to move, expel the Fellahin from their land. So they will become a lumpen proletariat, having no land to live on and no job in the cities. And they didn't also have a home. So the results of this land reform were not the ones planned. The planning was to get taxes from the Fellahin. But the results, because of Zionism, were very terrifying for all Palestinians. Most Palestinians were Fellahin, about 62% of them. And that meant that the whole of Palestine was suffering from the beginning because of the result of the Tanzimat. Now, the policy of land purchases was worked out by Herzl in 1896 in his diary. And he says the following, this was his advice in the 19th century, Buy land from the landowners in large areas and do so discreetly and secretly, keeping purchase prices low. Once purchased, the Fellahin living on the land will be expelled, provided work in what Herzl calls the transit countries, in other words, the countries around Palestine, and help to migrate. They will never be allowed a return or offered work on land purchased in this manner. He also said that the Zionist Land Authority, when it is set up, would be based on what we understand as a racist code. Land to be leased to Jews only, land could not be sold and remained property of the Zionist project. And by this method, the Fellahin lost their title and rights and became lumpen proletarians. So this has happened through the 20s and 30s. It didn't happen under the Ottomans, but it happened under the British, because the British assisted the Zionist project in emptying Palestine of Palestinians. That was their task. So the Falahin were facing, and this is very strongly pointed out by Ghassan Kanafani in the book that you were referred to. They faced three evils. The first one was a class evil. The local and remote landowning class, the Effendis, a parasitic class whose interests were aligned with whatever power controlled Palestine. To begin with the Ottoman Empire, then with the British, then with the Zionists, etc. The second one was the empire, the British Empire, a foreign power, uninterested and uncommitted to the Palestinian natives, hostile to them by the undertaking to build a Jewish national home, and by normative imperial interests, which were, of course, hostile to the natives. So British capitalism was inimical towards indigenous, the indigenous, and needs them mainly to be proletarized in order to be exploited. And this is true about the third evil, which is, of course, the settler colonial project. The Zionist project, the incoming colon on behalf of the empire, is hostile by nature and functions towards the indigenous. They industrialize Palestine as a capitalist class and nation in order to weaken the indigenous and make it dependent and landless and easy to expel and remove. Now, what then happens is that in the 30s, let's talk about the last decade before the war, 1929 to 1939. 29 sees about 160,000 Zionist colonialists in Palestine, 160,000. By 1939, more than 100% were added. In other words, it's almost 400,000. I think the figure is 385,000 of Zionist Jews in Palestine. No other project, no other colonial project has seen a doubling within a decade. This is even more than a doubling. Every week, 1,000 Jews arrived in Palestine. Think about it. Palestine is, as a country, at the point in 1929, less than 1 million people lived there. And every week, 1,000 are added. This is totally mad. And this actually means a number of things. It means that the Zionists are building an enormous industrial base, and I'll come to that in a minute. They are only employing Jews. They have a racist employment policy that exclude Palestinians from offers of employment. And when they take over village after village after village, the Palestinians also become homeless, not just workless, but they become homeless. And they become proletarized. They live on the verges of the towns of Palestine, and they have no way of making a living. And this industrial concern built by Zionism is very, very fast. Why? Because what happened in 1930s, and especially after 1931, is it's clear that the Nazis will control Germany and later Austria. And there are 350,000 Jews in Germany, and they realize that they won't be able to live in Germany very long. And after 1933, they want out. A lot of them were middle class. They had capital. But the Nazis passed legislation that made it impossible to leave Palestine with any money whatsoever. There were a number of reasons for it. I'll talk about it very briefly. The Jews of the world and socialists everywhere, and other people who may not have been Jewish or socialists, but didn't actually think the Nazis are a good idea, for obvious reasons, started a boycott movement against the Nazi Germany. That boycott movement was very successful. And within few months, Hitler finds himself as chancellor without dollars. And without dollars, they cannot buy oil, they cannot buy medicine, they cannot buy machinery. And there is a point where it looks like Hitler is going to lose power. And here, Zionism comes to the rescue. While Jews all over the world were boycotting the Nazi Germany regime, Zionism is offering a solution for the two problems that Hitler has, and they're called Jews and dollars. He has Jews and doesn't want them, and he doesn't have dollars and he wants them. And they offer him a program. And a Zionist envoy was sent within weeks of Hitler coming to power, and suggested a deal to the Nazis. And the Nazi party is agreeing to the deal. And the deal is called the Transfer Agreement. Read the book called by that name by Edwin Black, a Zionist, but the book is really the most amazing critique of Zionism and of the transfer agreement. And the transfer agreement offers Jews a country to go to. If they go to Palestine, if they go somewhere else, they are allowed to leave Germany, of course. And Hitler wants them to leave. But if they go to the United States or the UK or France, etc., they are not allowed to take a single mark of their capital. They can leave with the shirt on their back. But if they want to take part of their capital, this agreement allows it under certain conditions. The first condition is only to Palestine. This is what the Zionists wanted. The second condition is you don't get the money when you leave Germany, you get the money in Palestine. And the third one is you don't get all the money, because the Zionists take a third of it, the Nazi party takes another third of it, and you're left with a third, and you get it not as money, because they don't have dollars to give you, but as German goods. So you can leave, you can move a third of your capital, and you can help Germany to break the boycott because you're getting it in German goods. And that was the end of the boycott against Germany. The Zionism has broken the boycott, and that was the end of it. So very few people know about this agreement, but that agreement was very important to the Palestinians because it meant that more than 150,000, actually by the end, 200,000 and more of Germany's Jews ended up in Palestine. A lot of money was transferred from Germany to Palestine. That money built Jewish industries. They destroyed the industries of Palestine, the indigenous industries. They brought a lot of money, which was investment. The British also taxed the people that came. So everyone got some money, and that money came from the Jews that left. And also heavy industry was started by importing this type of machinery from Germany, and that meant that the beginning of the military industrial complex of Israel, now supplying 155 states, saw its beginnings in the 1930s. So what do we have? We have a dispossession of most Palestinian in the countryside. Their political parties are totally useless, and Ghassan Kanafani is explaining this in great detail, and I'm sure Hazem will go into it in a minute. The cities are full of dispossessed Palestinians, angry not just about the Zionists, but about the British government that supposedly was looking after them, but does the opposite and helps Zionists to get rid of them. The Zionist organizations are also building an army. 3 militias already exist, mainly the Haganah and Irgun. These are big militias, and the people arriving are drafted into those militias. Militias are supposedly illegal, but the British closed their eyes to this because they knew that they will need them. And indeed, after 1936, when the Intifada starts in Palestine, they recruit a lot of the Haganah and Irgun personnel and train them, and they fight together against the Palestinian cadres in the mountains and villages. And you can say for sure that without that support by the Zionist militias, it would be rather impossible for the British to end the rebellion of the Palestinians. And lastly, I want to say that the battle against the Palestinians, which killed more than 10,000 people, young, idealistic, mainly peasantry, with very poor armaments, fighting the largest empire in the world and Zionism. And Zionism was already well armed and continued to be now armed by the British. Most of the British army, now think about that. Britain is a huge empire. It has problems in India. India wants to leave the empire and to be independent, not to talk about Palestine. And instead of the army being in India, it is mostly in Palestine. And this is before the war. So they know a war is coming, but the army is tied down in Palestine until 1939, few months before the World War. And that explains also why Britain is so badly prepared for the Second World War. I want to end by saying that despite the fact that the leadership of Palestine, the political leadership of Palestine, the religious leaders of Palestine have done a lot to help the Zionists, and we're not really interested, as Kanafani points out, in a struggle. They were pushed into the struggle by the population. The population of Palestine must fight the Zionist project or perish. There was no choice about that for them. They were not coming from the upper classes or middle classes. They're coming from the countryside, and they have no way of living under Zionism and the British Empire. Despite that, the fight that is put to the British and the Zionists is a real difficult fight. To end, I want to say that what it meant is that the Zionists have learned from the British. This was a training of the future IDF and its methods. And the methods that the British have used in Palestine were more brutal than anywhere else in the British Empire. One of the methods used by Orde Wingate was called decimation, which is a method invented by the Romans. You go into a village in the middle of the night, You get all the men into the main square and you ask for all the names of the people who work for the resistance. And of course, you don't get the names. And then you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9, 10. Shoot number 10, number 20, number 30, number 40. You shoot every 10th man. This is a system that they used. And after shooting 10% of the village, normally people spoke. If they didn't, they start counting again. So what you see later by Zionism in the Nakba, and of course even now, in Gaza, the brutality was actually built and taught and learned from the British Army, and those people that were recruited into the British Army were the generals of the IDF in 1948, like Dayan, like Alon, like Sharon. They all were volunteers in the British Army in a unit called the Special Night Squad that did the killing in the villages. And the last thing I want to say is that the 30s were the period where the Haganah organized what is called the village files, which is every village in Palestine was mapped. The names of the people were noted down. Any defensive mechanism was noted down. They prepared the war in 1948 in the 30s. And so when 1948 war starts, they have up-to-date files of every village and every town in Palestine, and they use it very efficiently to expel the population, to kill more than 16,000 people again. So we're talking about a process which includes genocide and mass expulsions started in the 30s, not in 2023, not in 1948, not in 1967, but in the 1930s. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Haim. You've set the stage. You've shown the role of the British. It wasn't managed mainly by the Zionists until 45 and 48. It was managed by the British. Hazem, would you like to pick that up and explain how that exploded into the 36-39 revolution?
Sure. I don't want to do a kind of this happened and this happened kind of history, and Haim really kind of went into a lot of the really crucial key points here. First of all, I think one thing to note is since we're sort of okay, the occasion for this is the release of this film Palestine 36. Don't know who's seen it and who hasn't, but it's a very important beginning of a shift in narrative that's really long overdue. And by this I mean and by we, I mean not just Palestinians or the Palestine Solidarity Movement, but kind of the combination of that and others, partly with the kind of centering of human rights and whatnot. It's really centered the Palestinians as victims. And so the story of Palestine is the story of how Zionism and the Zionist movement and the State of Israel and its allies have victimized Palestinians. Which is, that is a very legitimate story. That is a story that can be told. But what it also does is effectively makes us Palestinians seem like these kind of agency-less punching bags somehow. And I think the recentering of things like the 1936 revolution do an important thing in sort of pushing that back. We are a people who have not stopped organizing and fighting. It's just that we've really had, in Rosemary Sayer's important title, too many enemies. And I think when Ghassan Kanafani came to write about the defeat of 1967 and the defeat of the Palestinian and Arab and actually internationalist leftist resistance and liberation movements in the September Civil War in Jordan in 1970 and 1971, this is the first time he really goes to write. He's written cultural criticism, he's done literary criticism, he's written novels, he's written plays, but in this moment he decides he's going to write about history, and he wants to understand where is it that this constellation of enemies that Palestinians are facing, where does this really kind of congeal, where does it come together? And he finds that the historical moment where this comes together is the revolution of 1936 to 1939. And so it's really important to understand that this revolution, this wasn't a regular kind of insurrection. It wasn't this kind of weak moment where people came out in protest and got quashed and move on. In any other situation, this would have been a revolution that would have toppled the imperial power and gained a kind of national independence for its people. There's just a few things that make Palestine exceptional in this moment that makes the British Empire really double down. So some of the things to kind of note in this is that this is really the crucial moment when we talk about British complicity and aiding and abetting Britain's role in creating the State of Israel, Britain's role in propping up the Zionist project. It's really the 1936 to 1939 revolution, which is the central moment in that. Because this is the moment where Palestinian society really gets organized in a very concerted way against some tremendous odds that Haim pointed at, and I'm going to kind of delve into a little bit. To have a 3 to 4 year sustained uprising. And it begins with a general strike where Palestinian shopkeepers, workers, and so on, taxpayers, all start to withhold. They shut down their shops, they stop going to work, they stop paying their taxes. And this lasts for 6 months, which makes it possibly one of the longest general strikes and most sustained general strikes in human history. And if it's not the longest, it's definitely one of the longest. And this is, this is really quite important and remarkable. And the same reasons that make it remarkable make what follows remarkable, which is that the leadership, the elites of the Palestinian society, which manifest as these kind of political parties and mostly draw from what Kanafani calls a feudal clerical landowning class. So these are religious elites, these are kind of the tops of these big families and clans, generally that own quite a bit of property, and effectively operate like what we would think of as feudal lords. And so they have no interest in supporting a peasant uprising. They have no interest in supporting a general strike, except in a limited way, which might get them a better deal vis-a-vis the British colonizer and the British imperial power. And so every step of the way in this uprising, from the 6 months of general strike to when it turns into this insurrection that grows into a mass-based revolutionary movement, is done despite this leadership. So here's and Kanafani's analysis is really, really important, because what he says is effectively we have kind of two normal arcs when we think about revolution. We have the normal arc of what we think of as a class revolution, where you have the working class get organized by some kind of leadership, vanguardist leadership or otherwise, and then kind of take over the apparatus of the state. In the case of Palestine, the people who would have done this, so the Communist Party in Palestine, was overwhelmingly made up of Jewish comrades. And it's only in the early 1930s that they and Moscow realized that in order for this party to play any kind of historical role, they're going to have to include the Arab working class. They're going to have to include Arab workers. And so they kind of attempt to do this, but it's really too little too late. And a lot of these Jewish communists actually end up playing a role as part of the resistance and as part of the liberation movement and the revolution in the 1930s, but it's really quite a small number of people. The other thing is that those Palestinians who had started to work on organizing workers, for instance, the dock workers, the people working in the orange orchards and the kind of agro-capitalist sector, they actually find, I mean, there's obviously repression from the British police state, but they also are repressed, and some of the key leaders are assassinated by the Palestinian feudal clerical leadership, specifically Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Mufti, who is single-handedly and actually kind of demonstrably responsible for the murder of two of the key labor leaders over the course of the 30s and 40s. The other kind of sort of normal arc of national liberation against the empire is that you have this kind of like national liberation movement that erupts and grows and is organized, but the leadership effectively is looking for a moment where it can get the best deal out of the colonizer. So you think of someone like Bourguiba in Tunis, or I mean, kind of you name it, Jamaica, Jordan, etc. There's this moment where the kind of people who want to assume the mantle of the leadership of the revolution will go and talk to the colonizer and say, look, you give me, like, you tell me what it is that you want to maintain hold of. You want kind of control over the borders or the military or certain economic resources or some kind of rent, or what is it that you need? And then, like, let me be the leader, you know, let me become the dictator, sort of on your behalf. And then we'll call that national liberation, we'll fly our flag, but your interests will somewhat be preserved. And here is where Kanafani's, I think, analysis is really quite crucial, because what he shows is that what makes Palestine exceptional in this moment is that for the British, they actually have an alternative to the local indigenous elite, what they have in the form of the Zionist movement, which a combination of things like white supremacy, this notion that this would that would sort of emerge after World War II of kind of a Judeo-Christian family, but then also Christian Zionism, right? Something that we cannot forget is that Zionism really begins as an evangelical Christian movement, long before any Jewish person or Jewish organizing initiative is calling for an ingathering of the Jews before the coming of the Messiah. It's Christian evangelicals who are making a shift. There's a transformation within a sector of European anti-Semites within the evangelical movement that's saying, okay, no need to kind of Shylock style dehumanize Jewish people. We can recognize the humanity of Jewish people just so long as they're not here with us in Europe, as long as they go specifically to Palestine to fulfill this prophecy, so that the Messiah can return. From the perspective of a Christian evangelical, the Messiah will return, and then these Jewish people will either convert to Christianity or we throw them into the fire with the other heathens and non-Christians, right? So it's still deeply anti-Semitic, and obviously this does not recruit or mobilize many Jewish people, but this is still part of the ethos of the British Empire. There are a very large number of key decision makers and leaders who hold this position, right? And we can think of this, I mean, Haim really sort of talking about the Ha'avara, the transfer agreement. There is this very clear intersection between the interests of European anti-Semites of getting rid of Jewish presence in Europe and the Zionists, who also want the Jewish presence in Europe to move to Palestine. And so someone like Arthur Balfour, who in 1905, as the pogroms are raging during the 1905 Intifada in Russia, and Jewish refugees are trying to find safety by going west, you know, he's leading the charge in Parliament saying, no, we're not allowing Jewish refugees to come into Britain. This is the hero of the Balfour Declaration, right? And every street in Israel has, every city in Israel, every Israeli city has a street named after this guy. Similarly with Ord Wingate, who Haim brought up, and who's kind of portrayed in the film, if you're going to see it, or if you haven't seen it. And Ord Wingate is a committed Christian Zionist, right? And this actually kind of is written into his character in the film, and we might come back to this. Something that's missing in the film, and that's missing also a little bit in the conversation around the revolution of 1936 so far, is really, in addition to the reactionary Palestinian leadership, who are constantly playing this role of trying to get that deal from the British, trying to say, look, just tell us what you want, oh British Empire. We'll give you whatever it is. We'll take whatever scraps from the table, but let us maintain our elite status. And give us some crumbs where we can declare this a victory, and we can kind of declare Palestine a state, and whatever interests you need to hold. Is it the Suez Canal? Is it your imperial communications with India? Is it the prestige of having some kind of foothold in Jerusalem? We'll give it to you. And the British are just giving them the cold shoulder because they have the Zionist movement to rely on for that role, that thing that makes Palestine exceptional in this moment. You have the reactionary Arab states, right? And this is something that is not going to show up in the film because the film is also partly a Jordanian production. And also there's only so much you can do in a film. But the Arab states, what exists of these Arab states in the moment of 1936, such as the Hashemites in Jordan, such as the Ibn Saud in Saudi Arabia, such as the Egyptian monarchy, and so on. These are all also effectively owe their power to imperial power, and primarily to British imperial power, with the exception of Syria and Lebanon at this moment, which are French colonies, and the more distant Northwest African countries like Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, which are under French colonial boot. But these monarchies are puppet regimes of the British Empire. And, in a place like Jordan, the head of the military is a British officer, is a British general, John Glubb. And so these regimes are mobilized and pressured by the British Empire, but also in their own interest. They don't want revolutionary movements showing up in their own countries. They play a central role. They really double down. The Jordanian monarchy, for instance, begins policing and hunting down anybody who is from the cadre or the leadership of the revolutionary movement in Palestine, blocking arms shipments, but also placing an immense amount of pressure. So it's really through the pressure of these Arab reactionary regimes that the general strike is called off. The people in Palestine are still very strongly committed to continuing the strike. And the same with the end of the revolution in 1939. A lot of it comes about because of the pressure, both kind of moral pressure, but also physical military policing pressure as part of the broader British imperial policing. Another point that's really quite central to note here is that this is the 1936 to 1939 revolution is an uprising against British military occupation and colonialism, right? That part of what people see as the crimes of this British imperial occupation is that it's closing off. There's this closing off of the US, Canada, Britain, and so on to Jewish refugees trying to flee the Nazis. You think of something like the Congress of Evian in 1938, which is way too reminiscent of what was happening with Syrian and Iraqi refugees in the past 25 years, where they kind of showed up and said, we'll take 100 families and we'll take 20 families, which was a way of saying we're not going to take any more than that. So a closing of borders to Jewish refugees trying to flee for safety for their lives, and effectively a funneling of these refugees to Palestine with all of the resources of something like the Jewish Agency trying to create passageways for people to arrive. But primarily, this is an uprising against British colonial occupation, about British imperial military occupation. And the key point here is that it's really Britain that creates Israel, right? It's really Britain that creates Israel by crushing this resistance. I mean, it's the crushing of the revolution of the 1930s really is what recreates Palestine as a field where the Zionists are the predominant military force in the country. After decades of the British coming in with policies that are impoverishing and crushing Palestinian agriculturalists and workers under extremely obviously racist policies, a taxation burden that just kind of boggles the mind given the poverty of the population after years of this. You also have the kind of funneling of jobs. I mean, the Histadrut plays such a major role in this, but really in cahoots with the British colonial occupation of ensuring that most of the new jobs that are created and even existing jobs, you have Palestinians removed and them going to Zionist colonists. But really, it's this fact that, this mythology of Israel as this miracle nation state, right, that made the desert bloom and that against all odds, and it's the startup nation and all of this kind of thing. The reality is, and we see it so clearly in the last 2 years, that since the 1920s and definitely the 1930s, the Zionist project is floated on millions and billions of dollars of imperial aid, right? That without these immense amounts of financial, military, diplomatic, political support and economic support that the Zionist project has received from its very first moment, it would not have done anything. It would not have been able to carry out any of its objectives, right? And you see this so immensely clearly in the 1936 revolution. You see this so clearly in 1948 and its aftermath, and then you see it so clearly ever since. And in the last 2 years, it's just kind of this undeniable thing where, you had 40 to 50 billion dollars given by Congress, and then another X billion of dollars given by these other European states and these other allies, in addition to all of the different forms of other support that were given. And so this is the kind of odds that the Palestinian people were facing, right? A reactionary leadership that had no interest in leading a revolutionary movement, an Arab scene dominated by dictators that were puppets of these same imperial powers that were intent on the success of the Zionist movement. And then the Zionist movement itself, which was being armed and trained by the British. I mean, Haim kind of touched on this, but someone like Ord Wingate, and he's one of many of these British officers that come in to specifically train the Zionist militias that Haim mentioned, not just on like how to use a weapon and on basic military drill, but also on how do you collectively punish, how do you enact collective punishment on a village? How do you depopulate a village? How do you best carry out a massacre in a village that's going to maximize terror to the other villagers and the surrounding villagers? So basically, the tactical playbook that we think of as the tactics of the Nakba are our training that was received in the 1930s from people like Ord Wingate, who also has streets named after him in every major Israeli city, right? This is an Israeli national hero, a Christian Zionist, right? So a full-on anti-Semite. And let's remember, so those names that Haim mentioned, people like Moshe Dayan, Yigal Alon, Ariel Sharon, Moshe Dayan was directly trained was a mentee of Ord Wingate, right? So these are people who very directly, and then, Moshe Dayan becomes the general of the Israeli military responsible for 67. Yigal Alon, a general, and for a moment prime minister and the main strategist of what to do with the West Bank and Gaza after 1967, until Sharon comes up with the Sharon plan or the Drubless plan as of the early 1980s for what to do with the West Bank and Gaza. One kind of maybe like last thing to note here, because I think I'm running out of time, is just I kind of touched on this briefly, kind of two things. One, that despite all of these odds that were stacked up against the uprising, you had this kind of power from below, and not just from Palestinians. You had people like Fawzi al-Qawuqji coming from Syria and trying to figure out how to smuggle arms in. You had volunteers showing up from different parts of the Arab and Muslim world and elsewhere, as well as kind of the small number of Jewish communists who joined in, and the fact that between the end of 1937 and the beginning of 1939, the revolution was winning, right? The British Empire had to reinforce the troops up to something like 30,000 British troops a larger number per capita than India, as Haim kind of indicated. There's a line in the film actually where Jeremy Irons, who plays Walkup, the High Commissioner, and it's a very correct line, right? This notion that actually, if the Palestinians win, if we the British Empire allow the Palestinians to win their independence here and defeat the British Empire in this moment, this could spell the end of the empire as a whole, right? That's what these kind of stakes were. And so you end up with these insane numbers of about 20,000 casualties and over 6,000 political prisoners, in addition to the thousands who were sent into exile in this counterinsurgency. And a final point here, which is that what the British begin to call their pacification doctrine. So what they start to do is find this euphemism for the counterinsurgency, for the crushing of an entire population, effectively, right? Where, if you find a bullet on someone, that's 6 years in prison. You find a gun on them, then it's an immediate execution, and so on. The use of aerial surveillance, aerial bombardment, collective punishment, mass collective punishment, the techniques of spatial control. This is we're having this talk in Scotland. The Scottish actor in the film, Liam Cunningham, plays Charles Taggart, who's brought in as a counterinsurgency specialist because he'd kind of gained his chops as a counterinsurgent in India. But the doctrine that they develop and the strategies and tactics of counterinsurgency that they develop that are just, they kind of level up in viciousness and cruelty and targeting. The kind of like kill every 10th man type, this sort of like using wanton random violence as a way of raising the stakes so high to say like any kind of act of resistance will be met with 100-fold, 1,000-fold as a collective punishment and response. The strategies and tactics that the British Empire develops in this moment are the ones that it then exports to attempt to crush the Mau Mau rebellion uprisings in Kenya, are then also exported to Ireland. You have this character, for instance, Kenneth Newman, who joins the Palestine police in the wake of this revolution and sort of learns these tactics and skills, and then is sent to Ireland, well, to the London Met Police, first of all, actually. And he's used to crush the anti-Vietnam War protests, for instance, and then sent to Ireland, and he's the top counterinsurgent in Ireland during the years of the Troubles, and then comes back to London and sets up what's known as the Territorial Support Unit, which is the main kind of armed unit of the London Metropolitan Police. Since the early 80s, has effectively been a kind of military wing of the London Police that we still see around us here. And so this moment is also crucial in the history of British imperial counterinsurgency, because it kind of really ramps up and ratchets up the notion of the permissible, the notion of what is okay to do in terms of targeting women and children and people who had nothing to do with something, and people who just like share a village with someone known to have done something, and how you do this from the air, and how you do this by kind of starving people and limiting what kind of food or access to healthcare they have. And we see this trajectory from that moment to Israel's intensification of the genocide in Gaza since October 2023, right? Where this is just taken to its extreme form of starving an entire population, so Taggart effectively tries to create this sort of fortress and wall to separate out Palestine from its northern border neighbors in Syria and Lebanon. And so you see the beginnings of strategies and tactics of how to quash a population, and strategies and tactics of violent, brutal imperial control that culminate in what Israel has been committing against the Palestinian people in the last 2 years plus. And it's not just the strategies and tactics, but the normalization of those strategies and tactics that then the state of Israel really becomes the trailblazer for, right? Is that the state of Israel can then come in and has been doing this to Palestinians in 48 occupied Palestine, in the West Bank, in Gaza, in the Golan Heights, and so on, as a way which then makes it okay for others to do, right? Is that Israel does it, that's normalized because Israel is beyond reproach. It is shielded. To criticize Israel is to dishonor the memory of the people who were killed in the Nazi Holocaust. And so that created this kind of shielding effect, which then placed Israel in this very unique position where it could get away. It had full impunity, and so could then effectively like change customary international law on what is okay to do in war. An incredibly dangerous position for the world to be in. Yeah, I'll stop there because I think I've reached my time, but I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Hazem. Thank you, Haim and Hazem. As Hazem promised us, not just description, but an analysis of the forces at work to get the result of crushing the Palestinians. And the phrase he used, Kanafani's phrase, we have too many enemies. Friends, thanks very much to both of you. Now it's question time. Somebody asks, who's going to talk about General Montgomery? I just read an article by Matthew Hughes in the Journal of Imperial and Commonwealth History, which the title shocked me, and I misunderstood it because it said he said he was describing how the British brutalized Jewish militias in Mandate Palestine. Now, having been brutalized by the police, I didn't understand the title. I didn't understand how the Brits were going to attack these Jewish militias. But the title didn't mean that. It meant how they made them brutal, as Hazem and Haim have discussed, how they created the savagery of these Zionist militias. Would both of you like to take a few minutes to return to that theme? And somebody's asking about Montgomery, but I'd also like to ask you to talk about Bomber Harris. Perhaps he shows the true savagery of the Brits when he said, any village that speaks out of turn, a 250 or a 500-pound bomb should sort out the problem. This utter savagery that's hidden from most British people, could you dwell on it just a little bit longer? Haim and then Hazem.
Well, if you want to think about the links between parts of the British Empire, I find no better example than the Black and Tans, which is a very well-known unit of sadists from Ireland that did a lot of the crimes that will then come back during the Troubles. But in 1920-21, when the Irish Republic was created, the south of Ireland was freed from the British Empire control, the Black and Tan were, unemployed, but not for long, because immediately they were sent to Palestine, where they were very badly needed. And they took on the training of the rest of the British police that was there, called the Palestine Police, to actually control with the kindness that they have shown in Ireland to control the population in Palestine. So nothing is actually disconnected. There are connections between all the parts of the British Empire. What is learned in Ireland will be used in Palestine. What is learned in Palestine will be used in India. It will be used in Africa. It will be used in Cyprus and so on. So this is how an empire works. It innovates, if I can use this term. It innovates terrible methods of control, and then make them sharper by use in different parts of the empire. Now, Bomber Harris is the father of the 2000 bomb a 2,000-pound bomb in Gaza. You know, there's nothing new about it apart from the fact that Bomber Harris, poor Bomber Harris, didn't have 2,000 bombs. He only could actually throw smaller bombs over Palestine. People are normally thinking that the Spanish Civil War was the first time that civilians were bombed by airplanes. And of course, we know the famous picture by Picasso and the rest of it. But this is not true. The first time it happens is another part of the British Empire, not far away, is Iraq. In the 23-24, the Iraqis were the first ones to be bombed from the air with terrible savagery. These methods were then used by the 30s, in the 30s by the British in Palestine. And of course, later on, I mean, remember that the last act of the Second World War was the burning of Dresden in a firestorm by the British and the Americans. The people of Dresden were just German citizens. They didn't do anything special, but the British felt it was necessary to show what can be done. In the same way, the Americans have destroyed 250,000 people in Japan in the first with the first atomic bombs. This is just an exhibition of savagery that the empire uses in order to frighten everybody else into submission. This is what Israel is doing. Israel was part of destroying Lebanon. How many times? I don't remember anymore. Destroying Syria, destroying Iraq, destroying Yemen, destroying Libya, destroying Sudan, and we could go on. And now they want to destroy Iran and then Turkey. I mean, are they really serious? Yes, they are. They really intend to do that, and you better believe them when they say that and when Trump says what he says. So we're talking about an empire like the British Empire whose specialism was destruction, death and destruction. That's what they brought to every part of the globe. And that changed by the Americans who start the destruction with atomic bombs, and now want to take us all into a nuclear war in order to prove that it can be done. This is what the West is specializing in, and Israel is the chaos engine of the West. It is driving the destruction, and Gaza is an example to all humanity. Also, it's a test that humanity has failed because we have not stopped it. It's still going on. Despite all the nice speeches of idiots from the Arab regimes that, as Hazem has pointed out, spent a long time, kind of working with the West and the interests of the West. So this is what we're talking about. Every single officer of the British Army and the British Empire was part of that machine of destruction, and they just sharpened the tools on the Palestinians.
Thank you, Haim. Hazem, do you want to expand on that? I'm just thinking of Churchill's statement that he deplored any squeamishness about the use of poison gas on recalcitrant Arab tribes, savagery and violence. Can you amplify that?
Yeah, I don't know if I have too much to add. I mean, sometimes we want to kind of give a face, whether it's Montgomery or Wingate or Churchill or whatnot. But this is a machine, right? And Montgomery is serving in Ireland before he serves in Palestine. He's serving in India after he's serving in Palestine. And each one of these people, Churchill's in the Boer War, and then he's basically the bane of most of the world's existence. The higher up he moves up the food chain. And then he calls the Palestinians the dogs in the manger, that kind of famous line about, would you give the dogs the manger? So yes, racism, the dehumanization of everybody who is not part of this kind of like fully human, generally coded, and this is also the era of racial science ascendant. And so a notion of white supremacy that also the Zionist movement really tries to position the Judaism as a kind of racial group that's also white, and the founding fathers of the Zionist movement really kind of there's Gabby Peterberg's book, The Returns of Zion, makes this case really quite thoroughly about the ways that eugenics and racial science really are kind of foundational to Zionist founding fathers and their thought. And so if you're kind of seeing this, if you're seeing the world as a kind of part of a racial hierarchy where you're at the top of that, and so these inferior races, these brutes and savages, are the thing that's standing between you and the imperial communications and resources and Suez Canal and oil and whatnot that are of prime interest to you. And B, a class system at the heart of British and French imperialism at home, that then also kind of extends to seeing this like a society like Palestine, 86% agriculturalists, and where you've just spent the last 400 plus years doing plantation in Ireland, seeing those agriculturalists as also expendable, except insofar as their labor is useful. Then if these people get uppity, right, then the formula is there, right? There's no moral issue with committing mass murder. There's no moral issue with torturing these brutes. There's no moral issue with anything that you could do, right? And you can see this now in the last 2 years, like the Israeli soldier, like we've really have reached the point where people are filming themselves as they commit the most horrendous of acts, because you've already done so much to dehumanize those against whom you're committing those acts, right? And so you can now glorify yourself as you destroy a hospital. You can glorify yourself as you sexually violate somebody who is a political prisoner. And that person who's been filmed doing this can now go on all the talk shows as a celebrity, right? And the only issue is, was there an official in charge who allowed this video to be leaked to the international media, right? That's the crime, is that we allowed someone else to see it that shouldn't have seen it, but otherwise we all knew this was happening. So I think we really need and once we've reached that point, it really doesn't matter if it's Wingate or Montgomery. It doesn't matter who it matters when we want to come and hold people accountable, kind of something like what the Hind Rajab Foundation is doing, trying to kind of identify these people, specifically what they did, and then to try to go and create this accountability as they try to move around and travel. That matters. But whether it was this general or that general, it becomes almost beside the point, right? This is an imperial machine. And also, it also creates a situation where when we look at Montgomery later saying, we killed a few too many Irish. We were a bit too brutal there. Maybe we shouldn't have used fire. That's a bit of a harsh way to kill people, or someone feeling the kind of shoot and cry genre that I'm sure Haim can tell us a lot about, that kind of genre within Israeli cinema, for instance. But I think of something like Waltz with Bashir, where it's almost like we make films to almost like self-therapize after having enabled mass murder and pain and horror. So yeah, I think we need to think about how is it that over the years we build something where it almost becomes like certain humans are more expendable than others. Certain humans, it's okay to torture and mass murder. And then how we allow ourselves to also get jaded. I mean, I caught myself in moments over the last 2 years where it's like, more bombing, more homes being destroyed, more fire, moving on, right? I've seen this before every single day for the last X hundred days. And then I catch myself and I'm mortified at the possibility that such a thing could ever be something I skip through, as if it's each one of these moments needs to continually mortify us if we're going to claim connection with our own humanity.
Thank you, Hazem. Could you say a few words about any, if any, internal opposition in Britain around 1948? I seem to remember that the Balfour Declaration was preceded by a British Labour Party document which kind of out Balfour Balfour even. And there in 1945 or 46, the British Labour Party called upon Palestinians to move out of Palestine and make way for so-called refugees. I mean, has there been any significant opposition in Britain before the current genocide to the Zionist plans, to the British program for the colonization of Palestine? Haim and then Hazem.
Well, there was very interesting, when I tell people that now, they think this can't be true. But Lord Montagu, who is a member of the Jewish Board of Deputies in 1916, was opposing. He was a member of the cabinet. He was a Jewish member of the cabinet. He was an anti-Zionist. And he said, this is a criminal act. We shouldn't do this. It's not our land. We have no right to give it to others who have no right for it. So even in the heart of the British establishment, there was a Jew and a member of the, the board of Jewish deputies then saying this is wrong. Of course, they changed their line many, many decades ago. But in 1948, which is what you're asking about, Mick, the main anger against the Zionist forces was not because they have created all this misery for Palestine for 30 years of British imperialism in the Middle East, but because they were, taking terrorist action against British soldiers. So, all of a sudden, it became really terrible that Jewish terrorists attacked the headquarters of the British Army in Jerusalem in the King David Hotel. By the way, of the 93 people who died in the King David Hotel, there were Palestinians, there were, Zionist Jews, and there were British citizens and soldiers. So it's not as if this was only hurting the British. Arab were killed, Jews were killed, and British citizens were killed. But there was no anger. And I think what Hazem told us about different British politicians and how they treated the populations everywhere, but especially in the Middle East, especially Arabs, especially Muslims. This is an Islamophobia which is very, very old in Britain and in Europe as a whole. I mean, it goes back probably to the Crusades. And, in 2000, and in 9/11, the first thing that the President of the United States found to say is this is a crusade, when he actually talked about it in an organized manner by the White House. And you will notice that everyone said to him immediately afterwards, don't ever mention the Crusades. It's like a bit like a comedy show. And then he didn't mention the Crusades, but everyone heard that. So this Islamophobia is systemic in the way Hazem described those positions of the empire as systemic. Islamophobia is a necessary systemic requirement of the British Empire, the French Empire, the American Empire. They all practiced it very, very well. So we are talking about a disease of the genre of imperialism. This is just part of being an imperialist of the West, is being Islamophobic, is being racist, and to kill people is fine, but not our people. And that's why that was the only point that the British papers in 1948 started writing anything about Zionism, because Zionism is not supposed to do this. It's just supposed to kill the Palestinians, not British soldiers. That's what they didn't like about it.
Hazem, Palestine has too many enemies. We've seen what Palestinians are up against, the near totalitarian suppression of voices in Britain and the huge alliance behind Israel. How can Palestine be free?
In 6 words or less?
Answers on a postcard. How
Yeah.
can Palestine be free?
I just want to comment on, I just want to expand on a couple of things that Haim brought up. Lord Montague's letter is something everybody should read. So this is the only Jewish member of the British cabinet in that moment. And at the core of his opposition is effectively what he says is, if we accept the logic of the Balfour Declaration, I cannot be both Jewish and British. For me to be Jewish, you're basically saying that for me to be Jewish, I need to move to Palestine. I can only go and be Jewish there. Because he recognizes immediately that this is Christian Zionism. This is that evangelical Zionism that is fundamentally rooted in anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitism that says, if you are Jewish, you only get to be human if you're not here with us in Europe. You need to go somewhere else. And ideally, you go to Palestine so you can fulfill prophecy. So you either convert to Christianity or we burn you, right? Like that's, and so none of this is lost on him. And that's fundamentally his, right? And this is the same dynamic we have with for instance, the struggle between an organization like the Bund and the Zionists across Eastern Europe, where the Bund is saying, look, man, here where I am, this is my country. If I'm going to fight anti-Semitism, I'm going to fight anti-Semitism. I'm not going to run away from it so I can go be a colonial power and replicate the dynamics of this kind of oppression and racism against somebody else. So, back off, either fight anti-Semitism or shut up, but don't go colonize someone else. In terms of the struggle to free Palestine, I think if we didn't know this before, in the last 2 years, it needs to become abundantly clear. Palestine and Zionism is not just something that's happening over there, right? The fact that these regimes like Britain and the US and Germany and France and whatnot are willing to destroy their own constitutional rights in moments where you have a cost of living crisis, something like the NHS is being gutted to the tune of billions of pounds, the pride and joy of kind of the British state, really, and rightly so. The NHS is a massive achievement when it was set up, and would rather effectively gut media freedom, academic freedom, all in order to maintain the bolstering of an ongoing genocide that everybody is seeing right in front of them, and it's just undeniable, tells us, if we didn't know before, that it's not an alliance of imperialism and Zionism. It's more of a nexus. They see themselves as one. The fact that it's not just, for instance, Britain manufactures weapons that it then sells to the Israeli military. The fact that the largest Israeli weapons manufacturer, Elbit Systems, has had a dozen or so factories on British soil, in addition to British arms companies exporting to Israel and selling to Israel. This is all telling us that this is like a house of cards. They all see themselves as completely interconnected, and they are completely interconnected. So Israel is not something that's over there that we need to kind of agitate in order for that thing to stop. It's that it's right here, right? Effectively, Zionism has positioned itself as the spearhead of global imperialism and fascism in our current moment. Right? It's the thing that's saying this is how we deal with opposition and normalizes genocide effectively as a way of dealing with opposition. It is creating the situation where we have expansion of police powers at a moment when a country like Britain is moving the way it approaches incarceration and imprisonment and policing into the American model of companies getting paid by the bed filled, right? And so now we have private interests that have a vested interest in prisons being full. An empty bed in prison is a loss of profit. This is the system that was developed in the US, and it's the same private companies that also work in the Israeli prison system, like G4S, for instance. And so we have an expansion of police powers and a limiting of what people are free to say and do and to associate with and to organize, in order to also then, we have a more clear-cut way of filling these prisons. These interconnections are things that the British state, the Israeli state, the news, etc., just are constantly communicating to us. So the sooner we understand that the fight to reclaim this society, right, the fight to wrestle back this society from fascists, is the fight to liberate Palestine. Those are not disconnected. This is not solidarity in the I'm over here, you're over there, let me send you money, let me raise a banner, let me raise awareness. Those are all important things, but we really need to recognize that this is actually one fight, right? Our enemies see themselves as one, to the tune of billions of pounds that are much better spent keeping people alive through the NHS, but are being taken out of that and being sent over. We have like a $2 billion contract with Elbit just been signed in the last couple of months, right? Madness. Mid-genocide. You have a £2 billion contract with the largest Israeli weapons manufacturer, after it's just spent almost 2 years being used to mass murder a population that has been squeezed into a concentration camp for the last 20 years. And where already there's this ability, the Israeli ability, to limit by the calorie how much food enters this area, right? It boggles the mind. And so I think if ever Palestine is going to be free, it's because we also figure out how to make Britain free, and how to make Ireland free, and how to make Turtle Island free, and to connect those struggles as the way that the billionaires are connecting the oppression of the people who need to fight those struggles.
Thank you, Hazem. Friends, it's 8:30. We usually finish after an hour and a half. With the agreement of the speakers, I'll do that. I'll thank both of them very much for each of their valuable contributions. Education's power. That's why we have these webinars, to discuss ideas and not to put them into action. It is perverse, is wrong. To act without thinking is ineffective. So Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign will add this webinar to the library of interviews that we've conducted over the years on our website. Please take a look, check it, see if you find them valuable. But join us, help us to fight back. We can do so much more if we can double our size. But I want to end by thanking everybody who's joined us. It's been a great turnout. I want to thank the two speakers, and I want to say we look for optimism because we can find it. We can see weaknesses. They're afraid of us, and we must begin to act and raise our game. Again, thank you, Hazem. Thank you, Haim. Thank you, everybody, for joining.